Injured. She sent a picture.
I want to go. I know.
Should I talk a little bit and try to get a sound check?
You'll be fine. This means repeat. This means 5 minutes left on the tape. Finish.
I hope to sooner than later.
Thank you.
Okay.
I will, yes.
And this is 80 minutes away, so...
Okay.
We're just calibrating equipment right now, but we should be ready in a couple minutes.
No problemo.
Yeah, or learn for a long time. Yeah, that's great. I'm happy to hear that.
Oh, Kimona, that's where they have
Yeah, ready when you are.
All right, excellent. We'll go ahead and get started then. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out to Village Books. My name's Sam. I'm a bookseller here. I'll be your event host this evening. I have just a couple of announcements before we get started. First of all, if I can ask you to please silence all cell phones, pagers, electronic gizmos, musical instruments, please stow them. Anything that might make noise, put it away. We do have some electronic equipment here this evening, so that's especially important tonight. If you can go ahead and turn those off. We do have copies of Fast Times in Palestine. They are available at the back of the room at the register over there in the corner. After the talk tonight, I will be on hand to sell those books, and Pamela will, I'm sure, be willing to sign, autograph, inscribe, and personalize as you wish. So do come see me and then go see her. While you're back there, also pick up a copy of our events schedule for, let's see, this one goes through the 13th of April. April, though it has been said to be the cruelest month, is National Poetry Month. So all poetry is actually 20% off this month. Our poetry section is up on the mezzanine, so go check that out. All poetry is 20% off this month. We do about 300 author events a year. Many of them are free. They are often right here, so there's sure to be something that you'd like to see. Do pick up one of these. They are hard to miss. They're salmon pink. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Pamela Olson, author and journalist. She is the author most recently of Fast Times in Palestine. Please give her a very warm welcome.
Hello. Thanks so much for coming. I hope the volume is all right. Everybody can hear me well enough? Okay, good. So the drive up here from Seattle was gorgeous, a lot of really pretty countryside, and the city itself is very charming, so I'm glad I was able to make it all the way up here, and glad to see all of you. So, you know, the way I'm going to have to, what's the word, like summarize things a little bit, because I tend to talk too much. I apparently find myself fascinating, so I have to learn to, you know, limit myself a little bit. But in short, I studied physics in college, and when I graduated, I realized, because I had studied abroad in Moscow for one of my semesters, and I realized that, you know, learning about the Chechen War from Chechen refugees and from mothers of soldiers, and then later from the soldiers themselves when I took a train through Siberia, and also learning, you know, Russian words and phrases in the morning and then using them in the afternoon was a lot more exciting than getting back to college and sitting in a basement laboratory watching, you know, instruments change their numbers by the hour. So when I graduated, I decided to, just for a couple of years, even though it seemed like, you know, unreasonable given, you know, you kind of develop a identity as I'm a physics person, so I have to do physics things. But I said, you know what, I have the whole rest of my life to do that if I want to for just a couple of years. I'm going to make money, travel, write, see what happens. So I ended up meeting a friend from France in Egypt, and we were going to meet up for about 3 weeks and just do touristy things, and then he left, and then I went on to Amman, Jordan, on my way to Istanbul. And I did not plan to visit Israel, Palestine, but I met a couple of guys who were doing work in the West Bank, volunteer work, and the stories they were telling me were completely blowing my mind. Like, you know, even after a couple months in the Middle East, you know, I still, you know, you hear little bits and pieces of things, but then their stories just like directly to me of what's going on. I was thinking either they're lying to my face, or my conception that I've sort of built over many years of just reading the news is totally, you know, very different than what I've been led to believe. So kind of, you know, more than anything, just to kind of call their bluff, I asked them if I could go and, you know, follow them into the West Bank and see this village they're talking about called Jayus. And I had met an Israeli in Egypt, and he had invited me to see his, you know, to his home. So I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll see one side, I'll see the other side, you know, 2 weeks out of my travels, whatever, then moving on. But my first evening in the Palestinian territories in this village called Jayus, you know, we had to take a settler road from the northern, we had to take a road from the northern West Bank around, northern Israel, around the West Bank, and then take a settler road to get into the West Bank. And if you're not familiar, a settler road is an Israeli road built on Palestinian land that only Israeli license-plated cars can use. So we had to take that road into the West Bank, and then they dropped us off by the side of the road, and there was a big pile of garbage blocking a side street that went to this village. So this British guy I was traveling with, Yusuf, he's like, you know, come on, grab your stuff, you know, climb over this pile of garbage, be quick about it. We don't want anyone to like ask us what we're doing. And I was like, really? The entrance to Palestine is a pile of garbage? You know, and if this is the entrance, you know, what's behind there? Is it just like a wasteland of destroyed villages? Is it like angry people who want to kill me for my freedom? Like, I don't know. I didn't know what to expect. But I got over the thing, and then it was just a bunch of taxis were waiting and a bunch of men, and they were like, Salaam alaikum, welcome to Palestine, you know, where do you need to go? So they gave us a free ride into Jayus, and from, you know, we went to this porch on a home that was kind of, I mean, the village is built on a hill, so this porch was overlooking like this vista all the way to the Mediterranean, and there's people like smoking hookah and drinking tea and talking, and they all, you know, introduce themselves to me, and one asks where I'm from, and I say Oklahoma, and he says, oh, that's a dangerous place. and I asked him, what do you mean? And he said, wasn't there a bombing? And I was like, well, yes, there was one bombing 10 years ago. And he's like, but it was very big, many people killed. And I'm like, dude, don't worry about it, you know, we're all right. It happened, but we're fine. And I was thinking like, okay, I guess when a place, you know nothing about a place except its bombings, this is what happens. You identify the place with that. So it's funny, they kind of turned the tables on me, where I had this whole preconceived notions about their, whatever, their way of life, etc. But so that was my first surprise. My second surprise was the next morning. How many of you have traveled in the Middle East? So the problem with hospitality, like people are always inviting you places, always giving you things, always, it gets overwhelming after a while. And especially if you're a Westerner, you start to think like, my karmic balance sheet is getting out of whack. I need to start paying something back. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to help with the olive harvest tomorrow. And so I'll get up at like 7 o'clock in the morning, caravan down the hill, and all of a sudden there's this giant fence in our way. And I start talking with Yusuf, and it's like, it's not just a fence, it's like a fence and army access roads and then trenches and then razor wire piles. And I ask Yusuf, I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, well, the fence in this area isolates about 75% of the village's land from its owners. And I'm like, what do you mean? Are they, why are they doing that? And so he tries to tell me the whole story, and that's in the book. But of course I'm skeptical. Like, it doesn't make sense. You don't just build a wall through someone's land and take it. But anyway, so and I say, like, I'm going to go talk to my Israeli friend and ask him what he thinks about this. And when I talked to him, he was like, it does what? Like, he had no idea that it isolated that much land from its owners. So, but anyway, we get through the fence and we have a fun day in the olive groves. It's like just this beautiful day, and everyone's, funny and charming, joking around, and, all the kids are running around having fun, and we have picnics and we harvest salads and everything. And then we get back to the fence and nobody's there. Like, it's just locked. We're just locked out of the village. So, we wait, and like we wait an hour, and we wait an hour and a half, and we wait 2 hours, and the sun goes down, and the men all line up to pray, because it's time to pray. And I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, like, I've never imagined anything like this happening, or seeing it happen for myself. It just something, I don't know, so affecting that I wasn't sure how to deal with it. But finally the soldiers came and let us back in. And then the next morning, as it happened, was the time when a new permit system went into effect, which meant that not only did you have to wait for the soldiers to maybe let you through, you also had to have a correct permit to access your own land. And those, of course, were controlled by the Israeli authorities. So they had not given anywhere near sufficient numbers of permits. There were people where, a farmer could go but his wife couldn't, or a farmer's son could go but the farmer couldn't, or the farmer could go but his workers couldn't, or the farmer could go but his equipment couldn't. It was this like whole Kafkaesque thing going on, and I was watching it happen, like a new level, a new layer of these things happening. And so that was kind of my third surprise. And then the day after that was Ramadan, and then Ramadan started, and then a few days after that, I met a Palestinian guy, who, I poured him a cup of tea. I didn't know him, and he said "Spasiba," and I said "Пожалуйста," and then we were like, "Wait a minute, why are you speaking Russian?" He's like, "Why are you speaking Russian?" Mm-hmm. But it turned out he had just come back from studying in Russia, and I had studied Russian as an undergrad, so we like totally bonded over speaking Russian in this village where we couldn't be alone together. We had our own like secret code language, and so all these things together, that was like 1 week in the West Bank, and I was thinking, you can either kind of say like, okay, that was interesting, and then move on with your life, or dig a little bit deeper. So I was kind of at the end of chapter 2. I'm like, should I move on or stay here? And of course I stayed there. I ended up getting a volunteer English teaching position for the rest of the month until I ran out of money and had to go home. But I'm just going to read a little bit about the end of Ramadan right before I left. A silver sliver of moon signaled the end of Ramadan and the beginning of the Eid al-Fitr, the 3-day festival of the breaking of the fast. 2 neighborhood boys sang jubilant calls to prayer from the mosque's minaret, and I ate my weight in the signature dessert of the holiday, a syrupy pancake folded over sweet cheese called katayef. Packs of kids set off fireworks to celebrate the holiday, which set my teeth on edge, and some of the boys got toy guns for their Eid presents. I'd played with plenty of guns in Oklahoma as a kid, both fake and real, and the guns of the Israeli soldiers literally ruled these kids' lives. It must have been empowering to get behind one now and then, even a fake one. Still, every time I saw a munchkin emerge from a side street carrying what looked like a rifle, my heart jumped into my throat. If the hospitality gauntlet was intense during Ramadan, it was positively oppressive during the Eid. I couldn't walk 10 feet without being invited into someone's doorway with a cry of "Tfaddali" and an invitation to a huge meal. The 5-minute walk across town could easily take 2 hours. It was like walking through wet tar. I was torn between feeling utterly exhausted by Jayus and knowing how painfully I would miss it as soon as I left. On the last day of the Eid, I made my rounds saying goodbye to everyone. It was impossible to see all the people I wanted to see because each family insisted I stay for lunch or a snack or dinner or dessert or coffee or fruit or all 6. I saved Amjad, Yusuf, and Kais, Kais was the Russian-speaking guy, for last because I wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. I was ridiculously behind schedule by the time I got to Rania's house, and Rania is the woman I taught English with. After Rania and I said tearful goodbyes, Rania's mother waved and said in Arabic, "We'll see you again, yes?" I put my hand over my heart and said, "Always." She looked startled, and Rania asked, "What did you say?" I said, "Always." She laughed her girlish laugh. "Ah, Pamela, she does not know this word. For us, it is a kind of, how you say, sanitary napkin." Ah, my face flushed. Well, for us it is too, but it's also a word. How do you say always in Arabic? Daiman. Ah, Daiman, Rania's mother said. Yes, always. See you always. When I got to Amjad's place, I was overjoyed to see that Kais was already there watching TV in the living room. He stood up when he saw me. "Where have you been?" he asked. "I came here especially to see you." As I fumbled for words in Russian to explain, I finally realized something. Until this moment, I had merely noted that Kais was tall, dark, handsome, intelligent, funny, and kind. But there was nothing I could do about it. This was Jayus, after all, and I was just passing through. But these thoughts had only masked feelings that were suddenly undeniable. Amjad and Amir showed up and sat with us for the last evening of chatting together and watching the world go by from their porch. When it was time to go, I wasn't sure how to say goodbye to the brothers or to express what my times on their porch had meant to me. As I opened my mouth to try, Amir asked, "How many brothers you have?" Just one," I answered, taken aback by the apparent non sequitur. "No." His eyes smiled. "You have 3. He looked at Amjad, and Amjad's eyes smiled too. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ma salama ya akhi," which by now you know means goodbye, my brother. If you read the book. Kais and I walked toward his house for a last nargila together, or hookah. Along the way, we ran into the mayor and his son, Muhammad the Charmer, which is what I called him, who shook my hand and said all the warm, because there were so many Muhammads, you have to like append some kind of qualifier, otherwise it gets messy. Who shook my hand and said all the warm, poetic goodbyes I had learned in Arabic, and some I didn't know yet. It was impossible to imagine I might never see these people again. So that was near the end of my, my first sort of month in the West Bank, and I had to leave because I was out of money. I needed to go back to the U.S. and make some more. I was just kind of, running low, I guess. So I went back to the U.S. for 6 months and just bartended, socked money away again. But the whole time, all I did was study this conflict. I went to Middle East dialogue groups. I audited a class on the history of Zionism, read every book I could find, whatever. I was just cramming my head full of all this stuff. And then went back to Ramallah to volunteer with the Progressive Political Party headed by Dr. Mustafa Barghouthi. And I don't have time to go into it, but you can read about it in the book. But my roommate, when I got there, was named Yasmin, and she was from the Gaza Strip. And when I heard, oh, you're going to meet this woman from the Gaza Strip, she might be your roommate, I imagined somebody thin and prim and wearing a headscarf and all that. But she was first of all, she was wearing a nightgown when I met her, and second, she had these ringlets that erupted from her head in all directions, and she was looking at me all right, do I really want this pink foreigner in my house? Because I wasn't just, the foreigner's fine, but I was obviously just as much studying as I had done, there's only so much you can learn from books and from this kind of thing. And she knew that she was going to have to kind of take me on as a project, which she did. And we have a lot of sort of dialogues about, things that she thinks are so obvious, and I'm why doesn't the UN do something? And she's like, sweetie, come on. So here's an example of that talk with Yasmin. One day I came home from work and found Yasmin in the kitchen wearing all black, her eyes puffy. Alarmed, I asked her what was the matter. The brother of a friend of mine was killed in Gaza last night. She shook her head. His mother and wife back in Gaza are destroyed. His brother lives here, and he still has to work in his restaurant. I was helping him today. I'm so sorry. She held up her hand as if to wave it off. I put cinnamon tea on to boil and said, I don't understand how you deal with this. I've only been here 2 weeks in Ramallah, and I'm already starting to feel overwhelmed. She sighed, Habibti, this is like, sweetie, I was grazed by a bullet for the first time when I was 7 years old. Some kids were throwing stones near my neighborhood in Gaza. And Israeli soldiers were shooting at them. The soldiers were always coming into our house and beating my father in front of us during the first Intifada, when I was just learning what the world was about. I thought it was always about soldiers and beatings and killings and checkpoints. I shook my head, but how do you deal with it? I don't know, you just do. You'll get used to it, Habibti, or you'll leave. That's it. Do you think you'll stay in Palestine? I mean, raise kids here? Of course, this is my home. I don't want my children to see what I have seen, but at the same time, my experiences have made me stronger. Is your family Muslim or Christian? I'd never asked before. It had never come up. She looked at me strangely. We are communists. I blinked. Communists? Yes. Really? I mean, are there a lot of Palestinian communists? Not a huge number these days, but many of our leaders and intellectuals have been communists. And there's a footnote about the Soviet Union being involved in the Middle East for a while. It wasn't easy for my family in Gaza, though. One time, these extremist assholes tried to throw acid in my sister's face because she refused to wear the hijab. Ugh, morons. Her face twisted, and it's getting worse here, too. Before the second Intifada, maybe 1/4 of the women wore hijab in Ramallah. Now 3/4 do. This is what happens when things get bad. People turn to religion when everything else turns to khara. Khara is the impolite Arabic word for excrement. Do you think the second Intifada will accomplish anything? I asked. She scoffed. This isn't a real Intifada. All we do is sit on our hands while they kill us and take our land, and every once in a while some idiot does a suicide bombing. If this were a real Intifada, everyone would be involved, and they would have some principles, and there would be Israeli soldiers marching down the streets of Ramallah every day. Many of her words surprised me, but I didn't feel qualified to have this conversation yet, so I changed the subject and asked about the roommate I had replaced. She was a Jewish woman who worked with an international peace movement. Really? I asked weakly. Communists, Jews, these were not the kinds of things I'd expected to find in Ramallah. Yeah, why not? She seemed amused. One of my best friends in Ramallah is an Israeli woman who married a Palestinian man. She's raising 2 kids here. It's tough for her because it's illegal under Israeli law for an Israeli to live in Ramallah. Sometimes she gets in trouble with the soldiers when she goes to protest the wall or whatever. Do a lot of Israelis come here and protest the wall? Not a huge number, but some. We chatted a while longer until she looked at her watch and said, there's a movie on tonight at the Kasabah Theater. Mystic River, I think. You want to go? The Kasabah Theater was a block off the clock circle in the opposite direction from Sangria's, the beer garden. We bought tickets at the box office and took our seats. When the movie was over, we grabbed a bag of roasted nuts at the shop next door and headed home. On our way to the clock circle, we heard a commotion and saw an Israeli army jeep blocking our path. Teenage boys were running toward it with stones in their hands. Yasmin turned me around. Don't go that way. Ugh, I hate when they do that. Don't they know some of the soldiers aren't right in the head? They get scared and they just shoot. Her tough act didn't quite conceal the tremors of fear and anger in her voice. I took her cue and feigned nonchalance while my cold sweat dried in the evening air as we walked home. So another theme of the book is sort of how, you see these things that you don't know how to react to, and so you just look around and see how is everybody else reacting. And then you just kind of act the same part until you learn to internalize how to deal with things. And there's some things you still I don't know, it's hard to know how to deal with even after many, many, many years. But so very quickly, because I need to start the presentation. So just when I'm getting settled in with living in Ramallah and kind of learning, Arabic and politics from my roommate, I got a call and was offered a job as the head writer and editor of the Palestine Monitor. And when I got the call, I said, are you sure you have the right number? I'm a physics major, ex-bartender. I'm not really qualified to run a news organization. And they're like, well, it's either you or we have to go find somebody else, and we know you, and you can write and whatever, and you'll figure it out. So I was like, okay. So I took it, and knowing it would mean I would have to stay for at least another year, probably more. And then, of course, that was like drinking from a fire hose, because not only was I learning how to be a journalist, I was also learning, still learning so many, villages and terminology and this kind of thing. My boss would say, hey, you need to write about Bilain, what's happening in Bilain. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right, we should do that. And then I Google, okay, what's Bilain, So after sort of 3 months of that, I was finally getting into it, finally kind of coming into my own and feeling comfortable. And then something else happened. So Dr. Barghouti called an emergency meeting a few days after I got back from JU's. And this was JU's Olive Harvest Part 2 in 2004. I was annoyed because I already had my evening perfectly planned. I was going to a restaurant called China House to get spicy Kung Pao chicken. Then I was going to go home, curl up around some hot cocoa, and watch a mindless Angelina Jolie action movie on NBC2 in my pajamas. Except now I had to sit through this stupid meeting that probably had nothing to do with me. We gathered around the big wooden table in the conference room. As soon as we were seated and quiet, Dr. Barghouti dropped the bombshell. So I have decided to run for president against Mahmoud Abbas. This is after Yasser Arafat died. That perked me up, but I still didn't see what it had to do with me. I was sure he could run for president, even if I was at home eating Chinese takeout. As I glanced at my cell phone, it was already after 6, and the movie started at 7, I heard him say he'd need someone to volunteer to be his foreign press coordinator. Whoever that unlucky person was would have to stay in the office tonight for 5 or 6 hours and compile the contact information for all the foreign correspondents in Israel and Palestine. He or she would then represent Dr. Barghouti to the world's press throughout the campaign, in addition to his or her usual responsibilities. The election will be in early January, he said, so we have less than 2 months to consult with our constituencies, organize supporters, design and distribute campaign materials, and many other things. Time is of the essence. Suddenly, I had a sinking feeling. No one was looking at me, but everyone knew the other foreigners in the office would be jetting off to England or Spain or Australia for the Christmas holidays. I'd be the only native English speaker left. Slowly, through my hazy, unhappy sense of duty, something else began to filter through my thick head. My boss was running for president, and I was being offered a front row seat. I took a deep breath and braced myself. I can do it. So that leads into the whole presidential campaign of 2004, 2005, which it was like more than another full-time job on top of my regular job, of course unpaid. And it was really fascinating to watch all of the forces arrayed against him and how well he did despite all of that. It's a really fascinating story, completely untold in the West. I mean, most of you probably haven't even heard of him. Certainly most Americans haven't heard of him. So anyway, I'm gonna have to start the presentation now, but it's a good story. And it tells you a lot about Israel's relationship with the Palestinian Authority. It's a very interesting dynamic. So this is Ramallah, the city where I lived. Just some views of it. This is, can everybody see all right? This is a church near my office where a friend of mine got married. A musical group playing at the French Cultural Center. An improv theater group at the Ramallah Cultural Palace. The PDA that I didn't realize was happening when I took the picture. There's a glossy magazine called This Week in Palestine that comes out monthly in Ramallah, actually all over the Palestinian territories, and these are some of the photos from it. This, another surprise was when I found out that Palestine has a microbrew beer called Taibeh, which is actually really lovely, so there was never any shortage of alcohol if you wanted it in Ramallah. Their motto is drink Palestinian, taste the revolution. Mm-hmm. And this is a village where the microbrew is. It's like it takes about half an hour to get there from Ramallah. And they've started a Oktoberfest every fall, and this is one of the bands that usually plays. I was last there in 2011 when I was able to see them perform. This is a movie being filmed in Ramallah called Pomegranates and Myrrh. The Al Masyun neighborhood where the Sangria's beer garden is located. There's a few scenes from the book and Sangria's. This is located right in the main traffic circle of Ramallah, and my guess is like Starbucks lawyers couldn't get through the checkpoints to cause any problems. So, and this is a bar located above the Kasabah Theater that I was just talking about. Artists and intellectuals tended to hang out there, and you know when the president went to Palestine, I was just so wishing that he would, go to a bar in Palestine because it would be so unexpected. And so, but of course, he just did the usual things. This, I wanted to post this with like a subtitle. I found him in 2005 when I took this, but it's too late for that now. I actually went there for lunch almost every day when I was working. Main Street, Ramallah. Another Main Street scene. This is a side street, but still a little bit surprising. I played soccer with a group next to the church. And this is the Palestinian Circus School, which was founded, I think, about 6 years ago. And they train people for some kind of semi-professional things like these kind of shows, which is in that bar that I mentioned. And they also go to refugee camps and teach children like juggling skills and that kind of thing. This is just some scenes of kids from Ramallah. These two are from the prom for the top high school in Ramallah. It's a view from one of the places where I lived, the Plaza Mall. I don't know if you can read it. It says "No guns in the supermarket," and I never saw any guns in the supermarket, so maybe it worked. You tend to think of the Israel-Palestine as like a desert, but it's actually a very fertile place. There's lots of fruits and vegetables that you can find most times of the year. Yeah, another little. Yeah, there had to be one. This is Birzeit University, the top university in Palestine. And an aqua park nearby. And a view from a village nearby. This was, I interviewed her shortly after she was elected the first female mayor in Palestine, and I really loved watching men bring her tea and coffee. It's really nice. This is a Samaritan village that's located north of Nablus. It's a really interesting story because they are the Samaritans from the Bible, and they're essentially Arabic people. They speak Arabic and they're integrated with their neighbors, but they pray in Hebrew, or kind of a Hebrew-ish language, and it's really fascinating. And they're kind of a bridge between both cultures. And that thing right there, the improbable-looking Acropolis thing, is a mansion built by a Palestinian business magnate. And this is also in Nablus, the Church of Jacob's Well, which is, it's a beautiful church, as you can see. And a very famous passage from the Bible takes place at this well where a Samaritan woman comes across Jesus and he asks for a glass or some water. And she says, why should I give you water? I'm a Samaritan, you're a Jew. And, he says, he reveals himself as the Messiah, if you drink this water, you'll be thirsty again, but if you accept, whatever, you'll spring up into everlasting life, etc. So it's one of those things that should be a major tourist/pilgrimage attraction, but every time I went, I was the only person there. It's very tough to get through the checkpoints and get there. Hopefully that'll change in the future. This is a restaurant in a village north of Nablus where there's a massive spring coming out of a mountain, and they've channeled it into 5 different waterfalls. And so you can sit up on the veranda with the grapevines over your heads and drink lemongrass tea and listen to the water and look into the distance. It's a very nice way to spend an afternoon. It's a hotel in Nablus. One of its windows got injured. And so this is the village of Jayus that I talked about in the very first passage. You can see the wall kind of right there between the main hill of the village and all the rest of its hills. Jayus, this village. This is the wall I was talking about, and there's some better pictures of the wall later on. But these are some of my friends. This is the guy who spoke Russian. This is a spring shot. This is Rania, the woman I mentioned that I taught English with. This is her little girl who she had a few years ago. And that's her little boy. And the reason he's holding a remote control like that is because when he was 1 year old and his mother was 5 months pregnant with his sister, Israeli soldiers knocked on the door in the middle of the night, and they said, "Where's your husband?" And she said, "He's not here," because she was afraid. And they said, "We have to look." So they found him in the bedroom and they dragged him out and they started beating him in front of his wife and child, and they took him away. And she had no idea what was going on. She didn't find out till a few days later that he had been accused of stealing cars in Israel. And, for many reasons, it was not a reasonable, it was almost certainly not true. But under the military justice system imposed on the Palestinians, there's something like a 99.6% conviction rate. So once you're accused of something, it's kind of, you're out of luck. So he was taken away for 1 year, 1 year of lost time with his family. He didn't get to see his daughter being born. all the income was lost, his health deteriorated, etc. And for that entire year, between when he was 1 and 2, he only knew his father through a cell phone. So that's him picking up a thing and saying, Baba, Baba. These are some other girls from JU's. I knew them since they were this big. I think I saw them in 2009 last, and I first saw them in 2003. So another village nearby, which again, I think this is where John the Baptist was allegedly beheaded. So it should also be a major tourist/pilgrimage site. And again, I was the only person there. So when and if there's peace, it's going to be like a bonanza. It's going to be a lot of great stuff to check out. This is another village that I visited called Sawiya, where it's kind of surrounded by settlements, and they were telling me the stories of how the people from this settlement tended to like harass farmers and kick them off their land. And there were these entire hillsides that were taken by another settlement, and they said, Sawiya has been here for 500 years. We haven't expanded from our one hill, and yet the settlers have already taken 5 of our hills. So, but anyway, I told the kids to say cheese, and this little guy said tease, which is a bad word in Arabic, so that's why everybody's laughing. I didn't get a lot of good olive harvesting shots in JU's, but I did get several in other places. This is yet another village. I'm an olive harvesting fool. It's like anytime I see it's olive season, I get this like tingling sensation. That, by the way, that is a settlement up above them, right up here if you can see it. And this, you can see the road going through the land here. That's an Israeli settler road, which they're not allowed to use. And this is a trench built through their land to keep them away from the road. So that's just a friend and her horse and her brother and his sheep. Very pastoral, kind of biblical scene. And of course, another theme of the book is the checkpoints. It's impossible to escape them. Most people assume they're kind of around the perimeter of the West Bank, but in fact, the majority of them are internally. So they divide, Palestinian roads from Israeli roads, Palestinian villages from other Palestinian villages, people from their land, cities from their hinterlands, all this kind of stuff. So it's really, to go anywhere in the West Bank, you have to try to plan around the checkpoints, which are unpredictable, both because sometimes they're open, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're jammed up, sometimes they're going really fast. And sometimes there's flying checkpoints, which means an army jeep just blocks a lane of traffic and pulls people over and tells them whether they can go or not. So, and this is one of the checkpoints between Ramallah and East Jerusalem, but it's quite a ways north of East Jerusalem because, as you'll see in a minute, Israel is attempting to annex large areas around East Jerusalem. When I was there was a checkpoint called Huwara that you had to go through to get to Nablus, and if you couldn't get through it, you had to hike over these mountains for about 2 hours, which is not the worst thing in the world. It's a nice hike, but if you're pregnant or if you're trying to get to work or if you're trying to get to school or if you're carrying something, it's not so easy, not to mention the fact that you can be arrested or shot or beaten up if you're caught. So this is the fence. This is another shot of the fence in JU's, the one that we came across when we were olive harvesting that first morning. The sign makes it clear they're not messing around. These are some of the openings in one of the agricultural gates, and that's if the soldiers show up on time and if you have the correct permit. These are some kids trying to get back home from school. And this, you can see, this is the fence/roads, and all of this here is JU's land, and that's greenhouses and almonds and citrus and guava and olive trees, and all of their water resources are on the other side of the fence.
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
So those children go to school on the other side of the fence, and it's open for 15 minutes for them to be able to go back home?
I'm not sure what the story is on this particular gate. This is an agricultural gate, so this one is for farmers. And so this one, there's there are several houses and even villages on the other side of the fence. So if they want to get to, the nearest village or the school or the hospital or whatever, they have to pass through, just like farmers going the other way. The agricultural gates are extremely, all these gates are extremely difficult to predict. It's really hard to plan your life around these things. And it's getting harder by the day. This family from Jayus, they lost 13 of their 20 trees in this area just for the construction of the, didn't lose as in isolated, lost as in destroyed. And this, so you can see Jayus under that yellow square. It's the little gray blob. This is the fence coming around on their land. Tsufin is a settlement that's already built on their land, that blue thing. And the other area is nothing's built there yet, but over Christmas 2004, when everyone was busy with the elections and the Christmas holidays, they bulldozed 650 trees in this area. And it was the trees belonged to the father of a friend of mine who ran the internet cafe in Jayus. And it was really, for that family, it was like they'd lost everything. It was like several family members had died. It was like the whole, like they were in mourning, or they're probably still in mourning. This is what the wall looks like in Jerusalem. And this is a map of the wall. So as I mentioned earlier, this is Ramallah up here, up at the very top. And the Kalandia checkpoint is, where is it? Right there. Just below Ramallah. So all of the, it's not really between the West Bank and Israel, it's between Ramallah and another part of the West Bank. So you can see the way the wall, especially in Bethlehem, it really cuts Bethlehem off from its land. It isolates Abu Dis from East Jerusalem. It isolates Shofat refugee camp from Shofat, Beit Hanina from Beit Hanina al-Balad. And this Ma'ale Adumim, this massive settlement here, it serves to almost slice the West Bank in two, like north and south. And these are some kids who made a Christmas card out of the wall. The city of Kalkilia is completely surrounded by the wall, and this is what it looks like on the inside, surrounded by sniper towers. And this is an Israeli highway inside Israel. And yeah, so here you can see Ma'ale Adumim and the wall and the settler road. They really slice the West Bank into two pieces. And it takes East Jerusalem, it takes these areas, it takes a lot of Bethlehem's land. And these two settlements are built over major aquifers. So, they take a lot of the water out and then either use it for Israel or for the settlements, or they sell it back to Palestinians at inflated prices. And this is a settlement overlooking Ramallah. This is Ramallah down here, the settlement on top. There's a lot more to that story, but I don't have time for it. Another settlement called Ilan Moreh above Nablus. This was a hill with a forest that used to be nice for hiking and different things. It was totally bulldozed to make this settlement called Gilo, or Har Homa. I think this might be Har Homa. So this map, you can see all of the blue spots are Israeli settlements. And all of the kind of light blue areas that sort of cut the West Bank into islands, that's called Area C, which is about 60% of the West Bank. And so if you ever hear an Israeli politician talk about annexing Area C, that's what he's talking about, and then leaving the rest of this for a Palestinian state. Okay, I need to go fast. So the southern West Bank city of Hebron, settlers have totally taken over this area and made life kind of very difficult for Palestinians. This is from friends. In the old city, for example, they literally built additions on top of the old city, and they throw garbage and rocks and eggs and sometimes sewage on the heads of the Palestinians below. So, and of course it's difficult for people to get there, it's difficult to do business, it's difficult to get through the checkpoints. So it's becoming more and more of a ghost town. And this is what it looks like in the area that's not taken over by settlers. This is what it looks like in the area that is taken over by settlers. It's like kind of a post-apocalyptic vibe. And of course, several hundred soldiers patrol to protect the settlers. Children are regularly harassed or beaten on their way to school. So are adults. This is my boss, Dr. Mustafa, when he was trying to campaign for president. Of course, the papers and Ariel Sharon at the time was always like, oh yes, of course, we want democracy in Palestine. We're going to let everybody travel. We're going to let everybody get to the polls. Even the fact that he was saying, we're going to allow the presidential candidates to travel tells you who's in charge. But he wasn't. He was blocked at many passes, including he wasn't allowed to go into the Hebron Old City at all. Just some photos from around the Gaza Strip. I was there during the disengagement in 2005. This is the Rafah, where almost all of these homes were destroyed to make it more difficult for the smuggling tunnels, but of course they just got longer. And if people's houses were totally leveled, they had to leave, but if they weren't, they often stayed and made the best of things. These were 3 girls who were all killed. These 2 while they sat in their classrooms, and her while she was on her way to school. She wandered too close to a sniper tower. And this story is in the book, but I don't have time to tell it now. There's a lot of stories about prisoners hunger striking in Israeli jails now. And it's hard to, you think, oh, are they criminals? What do they do? Blah, blah, blah. But roughly 40% of the adult male population of Palestinians, including my friend's husband, have been through the Israeli jail system. And, they can't all have been criminals. So it's an issue that touches absolutely everybody. But to end on a more positive note, how many of you read the recent article by Ben Ehrenreich in the New York Times Magazine about nonviolent resistance in Nabi Saleh? It was called, Will the Third Intifada Start Here? Yeah, so I recommend everyone to read it. It talks about a few of the trends of nonviolent resistance in Palestine, but it's really a growing phenomenon, still largely ignored. But this is in Bellingham, where the wall isolates about half the village's land from its owners, and they have weekly demonstrations, and they always try to do some kind of thing that'll grab publicity. One week they dress up as the people from Avatar, and still they're largely ignored, but they're still doing it as often as they can. And I talk quite a bit about that in the book as well. But I'm going to stop there. So thanks for listening. So, question?
You talked a lot about the wall. Can you tell the audience what was the idea behind it, why it was built? Is it really serving its purpose, and what you think is the main reason for it, and how it serves both communities?
Right. So I write about this throughout the book. As I mentioned, it starts with, I'm hearing this story about how he asked, about the wall. Why was it built? What purpose does it serve? And is it actually serving that purpose? So, I began skeptically, and the more I learned, the more it seemed that this seemed to be the case. But, what finally, I guess, convinced me was that Israel's Shin Bet itself, which is the Internal Security Service, they admitted straight up, no, that's not the main reason that the suicide bombings have stopped. The main reason is because Hamas has been moderating its positions. I mean, they stopped doing suicide bombings. They stopped, they moderated vis-a-vis the two-state solution. And the reason they did that is because they were entering the political fold for the first time. And that was throughout 2005. As they moderated, they continued to gain more votes and more village councils and that kind of thing. And one reason they were so one reason they were popular at all is because people were so sick of Fatah, the currently dominant, or at the time dominant Palestinian political faction. They're corrupt, they're ineffective, they sort of hoard aid money that comes in and don't give it to the people who need it. They have a bloated security apparatus that mainly works to, prevent Palestinian nonviolent resistance, or largely works to do that. So they viewed them more and more. And after Mahmoud Abbas was elected, the whole world said, we'll support Abbas, we want a moderate leader, all this kind of stuff. He was elected, he brokered a ceasefire, etc. And then it was just kind of like, one by one, the things that he got from Israel were, like, for example, they agreed to release 900 prisoners. Okay, great, that's great. But then in the next 8 months, they arrested 1,000 people. Or they removed 8,000 settlers from the Gaza Strip. Okay, great, that's a good step. In the same year, 2005, 12,500 new settlers were moved into the West Bank. So the Palestinians were like, hey, what's going on here? We thought we were going to, get something out of this moderate leader / ceasefire, and it's just getting worse. So people were getting fed up with that, and then finally, that's when Hamas, as it was moderating, it won the whole enchilada in 2006, and I guess that was a long sidebar, but of course after they won, the entire world was like, oh, they elected a terrorist organization, and nobody would talk to them. They were cut off. They went right back to being extremists because they had nothing to lose. So, but yeah, that was why Hamas was moderating, and that was why the terrorism slowed down. It wasn't because of the wall. And it wasn't me saying this, it was Israel's Internal Security Service. So, other, like the army itself admitted, yeah, it was rooted for, they had several court cases. And at one point they were like, yeah, we rooted it based on settlement expansion considerations and not on security. So it became more and more clear as time went on that this wasn't, it wasn't an accident that they were surrounding all these fertile lands and water resources. Let me put it that way. So, any other questions? Yeah?
I've met many people who have spent less time in the West Bank and in Gaza than you have, and invariably they return with a very, very strong sense of outrage at what they've learned. You present this without a strong sense of outrage, although obviously you are upset by it. But I wonder whether, having been there longer, you know something about an optimistic prediction for peace that the rest of us are unaware of.
So I didn't start writing this book until so he asked, he said most people who, even if they go to the West Bank for a shorter time than I was, they come back with a sense of outrage and I guess maybe pessimism. And he said, I don't come across as enraged, so do I know of anything, hopeful that maybe other people don't know about? Several things I can say. One, like I was about to say, I didn't start writing this book until 2 years after I left. I think partly because it needed a chance to stir and settle in my mind. Because maybe if I had just started writing it right out of the gate, it would have been like 300 pages of scream, These kind of things when this is kind of like the PG-13 version of The Occupation. When you actually see it day by day by day, it's something that, after I lived there a year and a half, I couldn't take it anymore. I compared myself to like some kind of rod that had been like just piled up with static electricity, and I didn't know, like, at some point there's going to be a spark and I don't know what's going to happen. So, I finally left, and I really have no idea how Palestinians can deal with it, like year after year after year. So it's been a long road to get to a place where I can talk about this calmly, that's for sure. As far as, is there something that I feel hopeful about? As horrifying as it was to see all these things in Palestine, even more horrified, I was inspired by the way that people not only sort of survive and deal with it and continue on despite these odds, but also the way they still welcome people like me who come in totally clueless, like, hey, I want to help. And they're like, okay, well, look, kid, you're welcome here, and let's tell you what it's about. So, this nonviolent resistance that we talk about, it's something that you're not sitting around singing Kumbaya. Like, you're facing tear gas, you're facing rubber bullets, you're facing real live ammunition sometimes. Some people have actually died from tear gas canisters being shot directly at them or from being overcome by the fumes. It's not a simple thing, and it's largely ignored but it's still there every week, week after week, kind of waiting for the world to catch up to them. As far as any hope for peace in the near future, I don't see any roads forward at the moment. But nobody predicted the Berlin Wall to fall when it did, and nobody predicted apartheid to fall when it did, and nobody predicted the Soviet Union to fall when it did. You know, so history has a way of, like, completely unsustainable situations have a way of unraveling when you least expect it. So I do have some hope that some unexpected thing will happen, and hopefully it won't go in a violent Syria kind of direction. Hopefully it'll go in a post-apartheid kind of direction. But I think a good starting point is at least looking honestly at what's happening, and that's what I'm trying to do with my book. Yeah.
Well, isn't one of the goals of Hamas, isn't that the destruction of Israel?
So he asked, one of the goals of Hamas, isn't it the destruction of Israel? Hamas's charter was originally, yes, what they want is, I mean, not the like physical destruction of all Israelis or anything, but the destruction of a regime called Israel that they liken to apartheid South Africa, which is something that they don't consider legitimate. That's their opinion. But as I mentioned, you know, I mean, if you look at the Likud, you know, the Israeli charter, some of them think that they should have Israel from the Euphrates to the, you know, to the Red Sea. And you'll hear people even like Ehud Olmert saying like, oh, of course, you know, it's our entire homeland, all of this kind of stuff, but we can give up certain parts of it. But he believes that it's not legitimate to give it up. But he, you know, he says he's willing to do that for peace. You know, Hamas, they spoke of a 100-year truce, which is essentially a face-saving way of making peace because they're not going to be alive in 100 years. So, you know, if you want to judge people based on their charters they made in times of revolution and nothing else, then you're not going to be able to. I mean, you know, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with people you don't agree with. So I guess, yeah, I think talking with them is a more productive avenue than saying, you're beyond the pale, we're never going to talk to you. That's my opinion. Yeah.
I understand that Israel claims they have control over Area C. They can put any settlements anywhere in Area C. They can expropriate any Palestinian land in Area C because of the Oslo agreements. But Israel has broken a lot of the Oslo agreements. Like, for example, there was supposed to be a connection between Gaza and the West Bank with buses. There was to be an airport in the south of Gaza Strip, all part of Oslo. Oslo was for a short time, 3 or 4 years, and after that there would be a permanent settlement. How can the international community not say that Israel has no right anymore to claim the Oslo agreements?
Right. He says, you know, under the Oslo Accords in the 90s, Israel was able to secure an agreement from the Palestinian leadership, who at that time was in exile in Tunisia, that they could essentially do whatever they wanted in this Area C that I was showing you, the 60% of the West Bank. And so they say, oh, it's legitimate. We have this agreement with the Palestinians. You know, I've talked with lawyers for the PLO who said, at the time, they didn't have any lawyers, and they didn't see the maps, and they didn't really understand what they were signing on to. But nonetheless, you know, Israel uses Oslo as a way to legitimate their building of settlements and restriction of Palestinian rights in 60% of the West Bank. And he mentioned that most of the terms of the Oslo Accords that Israel was supposed to do, they virtually didn't do any of them. There's not a connection between the West Bank and Gaza. There's not an airport in the Gaza Strip. There's not all these other different things. So he says, how can the international community continue to allow Israelis to use the Oslo Accords as a you know, excuse to do these settlements that are not legal according to international law anyway? And I say that's a very good question. Anybody else? Yeah.
So it leads me to my question, which is if it's possible to generalize how people in Gaza and the West Bank feel about Americans, and what is the sense of what Americans as individuals can do, or what they see the U.S.'s policy being that would help them, so that then that might direct Americans to decide how to put, you know, where to put their their money and put their pressure?
Okay, so it's a two-part question. First, how do people in the West Bank and Gaza feel about Americans and, I guess also the American government? And part two, what can Americans do, or what do Palestinians want the Americans to do to make things hopefully better for them? So as far as how Palestinians see Americans, we tend to project onto, because Americans tend to have a hard time distinguishing between a government and its people, so we tend to project that onto other people. But in fact, almost everywhere I've been in the world, people have a very easy, time distinguishing individuals from their governments. And one of the Palestinian friends I had put it this way. He said, out of people, we understand bad governments. Our governments are very bad, So I never felt judged or anything bad because I'm American. Of course, they're not thrilled with our government, and there's a good reason for that, which is that the United States not only provides Israel with about $3 billion of aid every year, which is about $8 million every single day, they also give them virtually carte blanche political cover for the settlements and for, the wall and for everything else. The International Court of Justice in 2004 actually ruled the route of the wall illegal. And out of 15 judges, the only one who didn't agree that it was illegal was the American judge. There has been about more than 40 United States vetoes of UN resolutions condemning Israeli violations of international law. So Palestinians aren't thrilled with any of that. So what can we do? Number one, instead of being, as Aaron David Miller says, Israel's lawyer in the international community, we can actually, condition aid at the very minimum on not violating international law in these different ways. And what can individual Americans do? We can tell our governments we're not happy that this is happening. We can educate ourselves and read, news sources that are more accurate, tell our friends about it, tell our family about it, and that's kind of like one level. Another one is, right now the occupation is not only relatively cost-free for Israelis, it's actually profitable in many ways, as far as the water resources and as far as politically it's not popular to talk about peace because it would mean painful compromises that they don't have any incentive to make because everything's just working just fine for them. So, how do you make the occupation more costly for Israel? There's different kinds of campaigns to try to do that, and I can talk about that afterwards, but yeah.
When I was there in 2002, there was a lot of nonviolence, just in the sense that people would allow their children to go to school or walk with their children to school. And the children were always clean and had these uniforms. But the one thing with the Israelis that any number of the peace people said, why don't you just get the United States to stop the money? You'll see how fast we can talk. And I wondered if you'd had any chance to talk to Israelis and if that still is a comment that's quite common.
I have, actually my host in Seattle is an Israeli. I have many Israeli friends, and a lot of them, most of the ones that I hang out with are actually, for peace and justice for everybody. I also know people who have a more sort of right-wing perspective on things. The ones who tend to be for peace are, of course, friends don't let friends occupy another nation for 60 years. It's a dangerous thing. It causes instability and insecurity, and it eats away at our morality as well. Suicide is a much larger killer of Israeli soldiers than any kind of combat. It takes a toll on a young person's life to be given absolute power at the age of 18 over 4 million human beings who have no rights. A lot of Israelis certainly would like a little help to get out of their sort of addictive situation, if you can call it that. At the moment, unfortunately, because things are so calm and so good, the majority of Israelis are focusing on other things, and peace is just not really much of an issue right now. So that's a problem, and there are still Israeli activists working on that, trying to make it a more thing, but it's not an easy sell at the moment. So, yeah.
So where do the majority of people who are actually living in the settlements come from? Are they Israeli born, or is there a big recruitment to bring people from other nations that don't have historical roots in the area?
There's a lot of there's different kinds of settlements. There's like the outposts that are sort of more radical ideological. Some of them are from Brooklyn, some of them are from Israel. There are economic settlements that are kind of like bedroom communities that are pretty close to Tel Aviv. And these can be either, you know, people in the high-tech industry who want a nice yard for not too expensive and a nice view. There are certain settlements where it's all like people from a certain country that were recruited to come to come to Israel. There are, let me see what else. I mean, like Ma'ale Adumim, that's a bedroom community near Jerusalem where it's easy to commute to Jerusalem from there. So it's a mix. It can be people from all over the world. A lot of them, though, are Americans. Especially in like Hebron and the really hardline communities, they're like people with a Wild West fantasy, and you know they're allowed to take a gun and you know rule over this land, and you know a lot of people get a charge out of that, I guess. And of course, what they think they're doing is fulfilling biblical commandments. But you know, if everybody with a religious document was able to go to whatever land they wanted and say like, hey, you know, it says right here, get out, you know, it'd be a mess. So, yeah.
Oh, at the Great Eastern Motel, do they have Stars and Bucks espresso stand that serves double mocha lattes with whipped cream?
They do not at the Best Eastern, but at the Stars and Bucks in Main Street, and at Ziriab on Main Street, and at Sangria's, and at Pronto, an Italian restaurant, you can get that for sure. I guess I take one or two more questions, and then we'll break it up. Yeah.
The U.S. congressmen and senators seem to be almost uniformly enamored of Israel's foreign policy. And I gather it's because of not only Jewish Zionism, but perhaps more importantly Christian Zionism. Do you have any concept of how that influence can be countered?
So he asked about, it seems like most of the congressmen and senators in the U.S. are enamored of whatever Israel wants to do at any given time. Perhaps that's from not only like Jewish Zionists, but also Christian Zionists. And how can we, if that's so, how can we counter it? As far as Christian Zionists, I write about that in the book. There's this sort of heretical philosophy that was sort of dreamed up in the 1800s called millennial dispensationalism, in which like all of the Jews have to gather in Israel, and then like the Messiah is going to come and convert them all to Christianity or kill them, and then there's going to be 1,000 years of whatever. I don't know, it's a bunch of whatever you want to call it, but a lot of people believe this, and therefore it like, then they're sending all this money and all these trees and like, oh yeah, come to Israel, you know, guys. And, you know, for example, Netanyahu, he'll appear with these people who are clearly kind of like not so closet anti-Semites, and because they are able to raise a lot of money, they're able to garner a lot of votes. And in the book, I cite a Christian Science Monitor article about, it's called Prophecy in Politics or something, but it's about exactly this, you know, this thing, and how especially they had a huge influence over George W. Bush. That influence is less important with Obama, but it's still important with certain congressmen and senators. And, you know, the Israel lobby itself is able to, I mean, they're very well organized and very well able to, they know exactly where the pressure points are, and they're very good at any one congressman or senator who puts his neck out, he gets punished. And nobody wants to be the first, and nobody wants to get together with others and do it together. There's no incentive. There's no comparable pressure from the other direction. So in Washington, like truth, justice, and the American way is not really much of a incentive to do anything. It's pretty much lots and lots about money and that kind of thing in elections. So how can we counter it? There's one campaign called StopTheBlankCheck.org, where voters can fill out a little thing that looks like a check, and it says pay to the order of, whatever congressman stops the blank check to Israel. The amount is 1 vote, that kind of thing. So, or just, call them and let them know when you hear the next pro-Israel sort of what do you call it, like a bill passes where it's like, you know, the bill praising the new settlement to come. I mean, it's not going to be that bad, but you know, it's like there's always, whatever Israel does, there's always some kind of, oh yeah, I'm going to have a bill to congratulate them on that. You know, you can call your senator and say like, hey, look, you know, I've learned this, and maybe it's not such a good idea. So yeah, it's difficult because, you know, they're so well organized and we're so not. And but I think American public opinion tends to accept this kind of default narrative of Israel as the victim and Palestinians as the terrorists. And with this book, I'm trying to make that framework a little bit more realistic. I'm certainly not, you know, reversing it to where the Israelis are the bad guys or they're demons or whatever. I mean, they're all human beings. But it's not the case that Israelis are the sole or prominent victim in this. You know, it's not very realistic, comprehension of what's going on. So I'm trying to move that framework towards something more realistic, and then when enough people kind of understand what's going on, hopefully that can cause some change. So I think that's probably all the time we have, but thank you so much for.
Just read the link up and see what's happening. Exactly, as we hear about